Gervonta Tank Davis could be looking towards Gary Russell Jr. in his next fight. I said could be. It's not confirmed, but could be looking forward to Gary Russell. Let's talk about it in this video. King Jr. got another video for y'all. So we have some interesting news here. Not some confirmed news, but leaks, rumors has it that Gervonta Tank Davis is interested in fighting Mr. Gary Russell Jr. We know Gary Russell Jr. is now officially the longest reigning WBC champion. He's been reigning champion for 5 years. He has a lot of successful, I don't know how many title defenses he has, but he has title defenses. And Gary Russell Jr. will be making his fight, I believe, on January 22nd against Masego for the WBC strap. I think Gary Russell Jr. is going to beat Masego. I just don't think that his style is going to be able to compete with Gary Russell Jr.'s style. And Gary Russell Jr. is getting old. We know that Gary Russell Jr. does not fight. He's not an active fighter. He's an inactive fighter. Gary Russell Jr., there was a lot of people that was ducking him. We seen he took a loss early in his career against Vasily Lomachenko. I felt like Gary was weight drained, and Gary just wasn't focused enough, and he had a lot of stuff going on at that time. But a loss is a loss at the end of the day. But anyway, Gervonta Tank Davis could look to be forward to making his move. There has been some rumors that Gary Russell Jr. could be on the table for Gervonta Tank Davis to fight. I think it's a very interesting fight. I think that Gervonta Tank Davis beats Gary Russell Jr. due to a lot of things. Gervonta Tank Davis is a younger fighter. He's fresh. We've seen Gervonta Tank Davis use his boxing ability against Isaac Pitbull Cruz, and I will say this: I do not have any problems with anybody saying that Isaac Pitbull Cruz won that fight. I just felt like Gervonta Tank Davis landed the cleaner punches, even though he was hurt with a broke hand. I just felt like he landed clean and more effective punches on Isaac Pitbull Cruz, even though Isaac Pitbull Cruz was bringing relentless pressure. And if you guys want to say Isaac Pitbull Cruz won, I have no problem. I just feel like Gervonta Tank Davis won due to the ring IQ and the boxing ability that Gervonta Tank Davis has, because we look at Gervonta Tank Davis's power more than his boxing ability. But I think Gervonta Tank Davis beats Gary Russell Jr. due to age and power, because Gary Russell Jr., he doesn't have the power, but he has all the tangibles in the world to beat Gervonta Davis as well. I'm just picking Gervonta Tank Davis because he's the younger fighter. We haven't seen Gary Russell Jr. never left 126 pounds. So if Gervonta Tank Davis, I don't think he can make 130 pounds. I just think his body has gone too far ever since he made 140. I believe they would be trying to fight at a weight maybe like 135. Gary's going to have to move up or something, or maybe Gary might try to issue a weight of a catch weight, maybe 130 or 132, 133 or something like that. But Gary Russell, the question is, I don't think this fight's going to get made because Gary Russell Jr. hasn't left at 126 in a while, and I'm surely he's not going to be able to give up that strap. Now, we heard the whole debacle between Devin Haney and Gary Russell Jr. that they couldn't get a deal done, and it was just a lot of stuff involved with money, term sheets, and all this other stuff. So I just hope this ain't the same scenario, but this is just a rumor that has come out that Gary Russell Jr. could be potentially, Gervonta Tank Davis could be potentially going after Mr. Gary Russell Jr. That is an option on the table. We've seen that Gervonta Tank Davis was going to give Rolly Romero a shot until the legal action has happened. But I personally think that Gervonta Tank Davis beats Gary Russell Jr. I just think that Gary Russell Jr., if he boxes smart, I think he can beat Gervonta Tank Davis. I think he can fuss Gervonta Tank Davis. And we all have to take a fact is that Gervonta Tank Davis is bigger than Gary Russell Jr. He has a 4-inch reach advantage, and he has a 2-inch height advantage. So we don't know if the fight's going to come fruition. I'm not going to question Gary's skill. I just think that Gary is too small for Gervonta Tank Davis. And Gary, sometimes he could be a dog. Gary might shock the world and beat this kid, but I just feel like Gervonta Tank Davis could beat Gary Russell Jr. I just think that Gary Russell is getting old, and I do think that the inactivity that Gary Russell, by fighting once a year, could hinder his ability, his boxing abilities in the ring. You know, Gary Russell Jr. trains hard every day and get a lot of sparring hours. It still can affect you in a long-term way because you're not really putting activity towards like fighting 2 to 3 times a year. You got to stay active as a fighter. If you don't stay active as a fighter, it could hinder your abilities. That's why I have Gervonta Tank Davis winning. But rumor has it that Gervonta Tank Davis could be fighting Gary Russell towards the middle of the summer. I'm probably highly wrong about it, but it's just a rumor at the end of the day. With that being said, guys, it is what it is. Make sure you like, subscribe, and comment. This is your boy King Jr. I'm out of here. Peace.